Thank you for staying with us. Leaving everything behind in one life and beginning another in a different country with different laws, different languages is no easy feat, especially for people who seek asylum or refuge. According to the World Bank, about 184 million people, including 37 million refugees, live outside their homes in search of safety and a better life. During an awareness creation walk organized by the National Commission for Refugees, Migrants, and IDPs in collaboration with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, urged Nigerians to show adequate care and support to refugees and internally displaced persons, considering the many challenges they are exposed to. Moya Thomas has details.
The NCFRMI and the UN Agency for Migration wants the world to pay attention to the rising number of displaced persons and refugees, especially as they are faced with many challenges. The challenges range from stigmatization to lack of access to education and health care. This road walk is to create the needed awareness on the roles every citizen could play to give the needed support to refugees and IDPs, and also to raise awareness on World Refugee Day.
To show that we are in solidarity with refugees and to also, invite whole of society. Everyone has a role to play in ensuring that refugees feel safe and are hopeful about the futures, because this refugee, they come with their dreams, they come with their aspirations, they come with their skills, and we'll provide them the enabling environment so that they can integrate and contribute to nation building for as long as they need that protection.
We need to look at the numbers, and the numbers tell us that the situation is getting worse. It requires additional advocacy, it requires additional solidarity, it requires additional understanding, because when we understand what the problem is, we can all look to ourselves and as a shared responsibility, see how we can contribute to making refugee lives better, give them hope to restart again until they're able to return back home in safety and dignity.
That is in tandem with the hope agenda of His Excellency President Ahmed Bola Tinubu.
Nobody wishes for war or the situation that they are in, but we are trying as much as we could in terms of motions and maybe to strengthen the policies that protect them and refugees in general.
Conflict and impact of climate change have continued to increase the numbers of refugees and IDPs across the world.
Our support could be the refuge and the shoulder that a refugee and a displaced person needs to live a fulfilled life. Moya Thomas, TVC News, Abuja.
Well, joining us in the studio is the CEO of African Refugee Foundation, Olujimi Olushola III. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here.
Right. Now, let's begin with the matter of the ever-increasing numbers of refugees across the world. It's still a persistent challenge, and I am wondering why this is so.
The advent of refugees globally, it really has to do with the quality of leadership you have in a country. And when you have a leadership that has no regard for the upbringing of their citizens, right, it challenges the very polity of what they represent. And bad decisions in government, bad decisions at the local government levels especially, create these challenges. And it's not rocket science. If you have a bad leader who gives bad policies, who cannot promote equity, fairness, and justice in all they do, then you create a situation where your citizens have to cross borders, because that's just the basic definition of a refugee. You cross a border from your country to another country in search of food, water, shelter, whatever, in order to make your life better, right? But that's just the beginning. I mean, the new phenomenon now is really not refugees. It's people who are internally displaced and people who are also migrants, who migrate from one place to another. I mean, the wars in the northern part of Nigeria created a mass exodus into other countries and into other states too. I mean, what a refugee looks for, if a refugee leaves, if you leave Nigeria, say, to Togo, it's the same thing an IDP will look for if they leave Ogun State to Oyo State. Right? So they're interchangeable now. And policies, good policies will create good environments. And if we search our minds back, you'll find out that it's really the poorest countries in the world that have the greatest number of refugees and IDPs. So we will continue to ask government, when they are making policies, those policies should be people-friendly. I mean, education, health, welfare, even what you eat, how you get access to food, all those are quite important.
So what has engagement with governments been with regards to addressing this matter? If we are saying at the heart of the numbers that we're seeing rise with regards to refugees, internally displaced persons, is bad decisions and some decisions made by government. How are we engaging government itself to really address the root of the matter?
Let's take your mind back to what happened in the United Nations Security Council. That's the highest level of any government making decision body, both at the international and at the global level, right? There's always strife. The Security Council itself rarely has a total package of acceptance of things. See what's going on in Ukraine. See what's going on in Somalia. See what's happening in the Sahara, SAGR. And these are conflicts that have been going on because institutions have been engaging the governments, but governments refuse to listen. A government decision is made by a man or a group of people. And if you say, look, end of story, end of this war, then you create an ambience, a situation where you can create some ambience for your people. But it's a new ball game at that level. So you need to constantly talk to government. You need to constantly put the pressure on. And all the pressure groups, not just the African Refugees Foundation, all NGOs, all organizations that have to do with civil responsibility, civil stability, have continued to talk to all governments, right? Hopefully governments will have an ear to listen. It's not an easy task, but the more you engage with them, the more government hopefully becomes submerged into the thinking that, yes, what these people are talking about makes a lot of sense. Why don't we take this approach? What does it take to stop a war? What does it take to create a good situation within the country? It just takes a man who is the head of that state or the head of that local government to make a good decision. I mean, people have been crisscrossing the world. Let's forget, in Ukraine, for instance, which is the base of the global war now, how many people have died? How many refugees have flown out of that country? How many buildings have been destroyed simply because governments refuse to listen? They could stop the war in one day. When they need to keep on talking. And so civil society organizations like ours and others globally will continue to engage government. It's not something I believe we have the magic wand to do that.
But share with us, basically, you have been, let's beam searchlight on the refugees themselves, apart from the causes of it. Now, share with us how governments have been responding to their needs, because they've been out of their original homes. They are not taking care of themselves the way they're supposed to. They're not working. A lot of them are not engaged the way they're supposed to. So they're like at the mercy of some institution, NGO, churches, mosques, or something, that is unconventional.
Right.
Share with us how governments have been responding to their needs being refugees.
Let me just give you an example of why it is very challenging for governments, right, to adequately support or fund the challenges of refugees. So I'll answer your question in another way. We took on the responsibility of saying this week, let's try and feed 1,000. I'll just give a refugees, in different parts of Lagos State, because that's the capacity we had, and we went out and asked people to help to donate. Now, at that time, when we took that decision, we premised our decision on the fact that a bowl of food, a bowl of good lunch, would cost 1,000 naira, right, for a refugee, or an internally displaced, or somebody who is disadvantaged at that particular point in time. And then the crisis of fuel came, right? And then things went up fivefold. Now, that answers your question with governments. When they try to immerse themselves in trying to support refugees, how many refugees or IDPs do we have in Nigeria, right? And the vast majority of them sleep under very rough conditions. Governments are under pressure, and they cannot fund everything. It is virtual. In fact, it's impossible. So you need as many people as possible, organizations to help. And the government can only do what it can. It can talk positively, it can act positively, it has the best of intentions, but really the resources are not there. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees itself is under massive strain. There are 54 conflicts globally as we speak, worldwide, and each producing almost 10,000 refugees a day. Now, that will give you the kind of situation and the kind of responsibility governments have. And so we must all rise up, people who have the capacity to see how they can also complement governments, because government is trying at all levels. You can't condemn them, you cannot blame them. They can only do what they have the capacity to do, right? And it's a deplorable situation globally, but we will continue, right, to advocate for the kind of equity and justice that refugees and IDPs
Speak to the matter of equity and justice, because there are those who might say, what would be equity? What would be justice for refugees?
How do they get back home? How do they eat? How can they be like you and I? We woke up this morning, a car brought me here.
But it was their decision to leave.
It was not their decision to leave. A situation created their decision to leave. You are not going to stay here if strife happens. You want to save your life first and the life of your children. So it was a bad decision by some policymakers or some institutions that created a situation where they had to leave. You're not going to stand up and leave the comfort of your house, right? So there are all so many things intertwined in one. And if you try to break them down in equity and justice and fair play, how do you create a situation where a refugee can have the minimal, most qualitative but minimal comfort of life outside their home? And so that's why this year's theme, which is Home Away from Home, is something that we should all embrace. And I'll again let you know, every year we come up with themes from the global level, at the global, from the UNHCR, who dissects those themes down. And, all countries try to absorb those and use those as their own stepping stones. But are we listening?
That's the question.
We're not, right? Hardly do we. It's such a thick global phenomenon that we hardly listen. We're feeding 1,000 people, right? We have to now do a ballot system, because last year we tried to do it on a very minimal basis, and we got swamped. This morning we're going to Abutameta. In 2 days' time we're going to Agbawa. In another 2 days' time we're going to Badagry. And we know the consequences, because when people see food, which is just a basic thing that they have to survive with, right? It becomes a free-for-all. Now, so what justice is there for people to scramble for food when we have plentiful? So we.
And that is just food. We're not looking at shelter.
You're not looking at shelter and how you're going to do that. So if you put yourself, you immerse yourself into the position of a refugee, right? And you think about, well, how do I survive today? I mean, take yourself away from your comfort zone and spend the night. I've spent nights in camps. I was in Darfur, right, at the inception of this foundation, and I know how top-ranking generals were forced to dive under blankets in thick fog in the hills when the war started. No food, no shelter, the family's all gone. And we don't pray for that at all. So that is a very graphic situation. And at all costs, we have to avoid a situation where we, in this country, and again on this continent, get involved. Because like I said, it's the poorest nations mostly who produce the greatest number of refugees globally.
Yes.
Right. And so how do we extricate ourselves from that phenomenon and come back home and be our brother's keepers? That's the key question.
Okay, now talk to us about some of the vulnerabilities or how vulnerable refugees are sometimes. Now, you created a picture of, rationing resources because it can't be adequate for everyone. So I am thinking that in the camp where refugees are just waiting for what they'll be given on a daily basis, just for them to live and, for the day. Right. And then you have, in some instances, where security agents who are supposed to guard and watch over them sometimes take advantage of their vulnerabilities and then use them as baits sometimes. If you want me to give you this, to give me that, and on all of that. Talking about the issues of them being vulnerable to rape, them being vulnerable to other things. Talk to us from the perspective of prosecuting these people who
getting justice,
who try to take advantage of vulnerable refugees and IDPs.
Fantastic. It's a very good observation you had made, and this had been a challenge over time. And it will also continue to be a challenge because don't forget, a refugee camp is a conglomeration of different units of people, old, young, women and men, X, Y, Z, and so on and so forth. And those people who look after them are also from the same environment. Mitigating circumstances force people to come together. And you'll bring your character. Right? And these things will happen. Theft, unfortunately, rape, and, hunger, and favoritism, and so on and so forth. So a camp is an ecosystem of the world, right? You cannot divorce the challenges of living from a refugee camp. It happens. It will create itself naturally. In a refugee camp, if you stay there for a week, right, and look at when the Uru camp was available, was still open, you find a set of people who have skills, bring their skills to bear, tailors, carpenters, what have you, hair makers. You find a set of people who become security guards. You find a set of people who are the leaders in the camp, who give orders, albeit silent. And you find a set of people who deliver justice within the system itself, right? Because it's not a language you and I can understand because we have not been there particularly. So when governments hear about injustices in camps, they try as much as possible to prosecute them. And even at the highest level, there were challenges. I'm trying to remember which country, when the United Nations peacekeeping force, I think I don't want to misquote, I can't remember now, but it was a documentary. They were involved, one of the peacekeeping forces were involved in actually raping young boys in some African country, I'm trying to remember. And it was brought to the attention of the highest level of the United Nations that this was happening in this country. They tried to cover it up and they sacked them. And it's a documentary on Netflix. We all watched it at the training session. And so that happens. So you can't extricate that at all. But governments are trying. Governments try as much as possible to see what they can do. For one misdemeanor, or for every 10 misdemeanors, possibly you get one or two judgments in favor of the refugees. But it's far too many. I mean, we just don't have the resources to cope. The resources are not there, but we can only try, right? I mean, how many people want to really pay attention to refugees and IDPs when they themselves are struggling to survive? So that's a situation which we will continue to bring the attention of the world to the plight of IDPs and refugees. The NCFR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and all the IOM, we're all collaborating partners. We all try to do our bit, right? Hopefully a bit, though it is not enough, we want other people to join. And you don't have to be a member of any of these organizations to be your brother's keepers. Because, like we say, refugees don't drop from the sky. They're products of man's inhumanity to man.
You've been speaking about mentioning brothers keepers, there are those who are wondering how they can do that, because even our correspondent mentioned everyone has a role to play. Now, speak to the aspect of roles. Individuals can just play at ensuring that they, help lessen this burden on the lives of, IDPs.
Last year, what we did when we started this novel project, because we looked at what could we do which didn't really require, resources per se. And we thought, let's go out, let's ask people, give us some money and let's go feed 400 people in different, just as part of our own gesture. This year we said we would do 1,000 because, again, resources are limited. But I'll tell you something now. When this strategy session met, and we said, what we should actually do is not really collect resources from people. It's to ask people to just look next door. Look next door to who is next to you, who is unfortunate, and feed the person, and clothe the person, and help the person. And if the person needs some attention, be part of that group of people to give that person attention. Now, that is the best recipe. That way, you know that you're creating hope for someone who is next to you, who is disadvantaged. You don't need an organization. So you do your own bit. If it's one person, you can do that too. And you can tell that person or your friend to do the same thing to the neighbor next door, and this neighbor can do the same thing to the neighbor next door. You have an unbreakable blockchain of sympathy and of understanding that goes around. So that is the best way. And what we're advocating for, what we'll be advocating for from now on, is it's not really collecting resources from the foundation of the UNHCR. You just look next door. Who is next door to me? Oh, this person is disadvantaged, or this. How can I uplift that person? Now, if every one fortunate person, every one able person can do that for one or two people, I mean, you've made a difference.
Right.
And that is the way we think the world should go. You do not need to wait for the UNHCR or for RF or for the AU or anybody. You can play the role.
So
you can make that difference.
So the task now is how to get people to begin to understand, to play that role.
Absolutely.
By themselves.
Absolutely.
Okay, talk to us on a day like this. How best do we commemorate a day like this?
First, for you, it's by what I have just said. Okay. When you get home, find out, or when you get out of here, who is disadvantaged next to me?
Okay.
Do you want a meal? Do you need a medical checkup? Basic one? X, Y, Z, and do that. That's how best you can commemorate the day. But what we are doing, like I said, when I leave here, we're going to Butemeta in Lagos, the Lagos environment. We're going to talk to a few indigent people and feed them. We take lunch to them, pack lunch to them, and get them, talk to them. Take a few names, those who are a little bit critically ill, we can try and recommend them. Because the foundation also has a team of honorary doctors, who we call from time to time, And again, resources don't allow us to do these things on a continuous basis. So we make sure that on every June 20, apart from attending the various meetings here and then, convening workshops and talk shops, which help to bring these issues to fore, we try to be practical. But like you said, and our viewers out there, if you want to make a difference today, just do what we have at Bola. Go next door, feed the refugees.
But for governments, on the government level, what kind of policy framework we have in new administration? What would you want them to do differently from what previous governments have done at addressing the plights of internally displaced persons and those who are disadvantaged?
There's nothing that the Nigerian framework, the Nigerian constitution, and I use the word constitution rather loosely, but I mean the framework of directives. There's nothing that it doesn't say that governments have not practiced in the past. Let me give you a very good example.
Right.
When the OAU was still the OAU, chairman of the Committee of 15, who happened to be the founder of the RF, right, and his colleagues set up a framework where governments had to include something called then early warning systems of disaster, right? Because disasters are the first things that create refugees within the local communities. And each country was then mandated, look, go back and set up a national commission for refugees and migrants. And the one in Nigeria has been taken from refugees to migrants and internally displaced people. And why don't you start it at the local level? Encourage people at the local level to, leaders on your street to look for any situations of disaster so that they can quickly report, right? And that hasn't worked because the education, the enlightenment, the orientation has not been as thorough as it should be right now. And believe you me, if you have a disaster management awareness expert on your street, in your locality, that's the beginning of a whole range of new ideas, new instructions, new ways of thinking so that you can avert crisis. And crises don't just come from bad government decisions. Crisis comes from, within, you start from your state, your local government, you can see maybe the neighborhood watch and so on and so forth. So government has to take that as a priority. And we submitted a policy document through the African Center for Development. I think we had a meeting 3 months ago, and we submitted a lot of policy documents to whoever was going to become the incumbent administration on behalf of NGOs. And they have that there. And the government will not say they do not have the ideas. They have not heard from the NGOs or from the civil society sector. Right. They have more than enough information.
All right. And so acting on them will be the next thing. We must thank you, CEO of African Refugee Foundation, Olujimi Olushola III, for your time.
Thank you very much.